On the show this week, we drive the all-new BMW X1, the Audi S5 Sportback, and Volkswagen's new Beetle as well.
The 2016 Auto Expo is just winding down. All the cars on display are being ready to be shipped to their respective showrooms and factories, all except this one. This is the all-new BMW X1. It's an important car and one that I have been itching to get behind the wheel of. I've got the keys to it and I'm going to be driving it straight off the show floor to bring you the very first review of the new X1 in India. I take my first proper look at the X1 away from the arc lights the next morning, and the first impressions are very positive. The design of the new X1 is a big departure from the old car. Where the old one looked like a jacked up estate, this one looks more convincing and looks every bit like a small SUV. It's slightly shorter than the old one and slightly taller, and that seems to have made all the difference because the proportions are a whole lot nicer now. If we get down to the numbers, the new X1 is actually 36mm shorter but 21mm wider and 53mm taller than its predecessor. A lot of how the new X1 looks and its changed dimensions are down to how it's put together. This one is built on BMW's new front-wheel drive UKL platform, and unlike the last X1 that positioned its engine longitudinally, this one places its engine transversely. The long bonnet look is gone and what you see is a more cab-forward design. The look is unmistakably BMW with the large kidney grille up front flanked by shapely headlights with those trademark LED rings. The particular X1 with us is the range-topping M Sport version that gets sportier, more sculpted bumpers, M badging on the flanks and smart 18-inch wheels. It's also the only X1 that can be had in this racy shade of Estoril blue. At the sides, the X1 manages to look larger than its predecessor, and elements like the mildly flared wheel arches and strong beltline give it a nicer look as well. The rake of the rear windscreen is also more SUV now, and styling at the rear is very modern BMW. The spread out tail lights with their LED elements look particularly attractive. How about the boot? At 505 litres, it's a full 85 litres larger than the old X1s. You also get power fold for the 3 rear seats, which means luggage capacity can be increased to 1550 litres. So, the X1's boot is large, easy to access and really accommodating, but there's one more thing I want to highlight, and that's this little recess. Yes, BMW has been listening to you. You get a proper space saver spare tire now. The good news continues inside the cabin as well. Now, anyone who's been in the old X1 will immediately find themselves sitting a lot higher here, and as a result, visibility is really nice. It's significantly better than the old car. What also helps visibility is that the dashboard is nice and low. The dashboard is typical BMW fare, so it's neat, clean, uncluttered, but it does look a bit too much like the other cars. Cabin quality on the whole is good. There's these nice padded plastics on the dash top, but there are a few areas where the X1 could have been better. For instance, on the door pockets where the plastics are hard and don't feel all that premium. No complaints for this M Sport version's nicely contoured powered front seats though. They look rich and offer great support. The M-Spec 3-spoke steering wheel complete with paddle shifters also adds a great deal of sportiness in here. Talking equipment, the M Sport also gets heads-up display, panoramic sunroof and a high-res 8.8-inch display for the iDrive infotainment system. There's navigation and onboard music storage too, but sadly no reverse camera. Time to get into the back seat. One of the advantages of BMW moving from a rear-wheel drive platform on the old X1 to a front-wheel drive platform on the new X1 is in interior packaging, and that is most evident when you sit in the back seat. As you can tell, there's plenty of knee room, which is something you didn't get in the earlier car, and mind you, the front seat is set to my driving position. There's generous amount of headroom as well, and it just feels a lot larger than the outgoing car. Another point to bring in is the rear seat itself, because it seats you in just the right posture, so you won't feel uncomfortable even after long stints. So it's more spacious and more comfortable, but how is the new X1 to drive? A bit about the mechanicals first. For now, the X1 is available only in diesel form and uses BMW's latest 2-litre 4-cylinder diesel engine. Peak power is an impressive 187 bhp and max torque is a strong 40.7 kgm. An 8-speed automatic gearbox is standard fit, but buyers have the option to choose between front-wheel drive and all-wheel drive. The two obviously available at different price points. In normal driving conditions, the X-Drive system powers the front wheels, but when needed, it can send 100% torque to the rear axle. So, how does it all come together? The engine is nice and punchy. It's got a very strong mid-range, so say between 1500 RPM till about 3500 RPM, you have good access to power. Performance is pretty impressive. You'll be quite amazed by how quickly this one picks up speed. On manual mode, you can rev the engine to 5000 RPM, though it won't hold shifts. But on its own, the gearbox will upshift at a maximum of 4500 RPM. But given the access of power you have, you won't really complain. The quick shifting gearbox also helps bring the best out of the engine. The gearbox works well in auto, and the paddle shifters really are very responsive. In our preliminary test, the X1 zipped from 0 to 100 kph in 8.6 seconds, which puts it in the same performance bracket as the similar powered Audi Q3 35 TDI. The in-gear timings are also about at par. What further strengthens the X1's case is ride comfort. The X1 suspension is set up on the softer side, and that's good because it absorbs all the surface imperfections well and keeps you pretty well isolated from the happenings underneath. The softness of the suspension doesn't mean the dynamics are bad, because this is a very well-balanced car. In fact, BMW claims the new X1 boasts an ideal 50-50 front-to-rear weight distribution. It's a keen handler and not that much behind the rear-wheel driven original X1 in this department. Just don't expect to get the tail out here. Still, the steering is one of the elements that stands out. The steering has good feel off-center, there's nice weight to it, and that heft which you used to get in the old X1 isn't here. This one feels nice and precise. Thanks to the lighter steering, it's easier to drive in town and just easier to live with too. Impressive. The new BMW X1 is quite the package, especially when you see it in light of the old one. Not only is this one nicer to look at, it's also got a nicer cabin and there's a whole lot more space. Performance from the diesel engine is really impressive. Agreed, this X1 isn't quite as engaging to drive as the old one was, but you still won't really have reason to complain. This is a more versatile and a more complete SUV, and that's the reason to like it. What makes it more likable still is the way BMW has priced it. Prices start at 29.9 lakh rupees and top off at 39.9 lakh rupees. For the money, this could just be the best small luxury SUV you can buy.
Coming up after this break, Audi's fast S5 Sportback and Volkswagen's new Beetle.
I know it.
Now this beautiful yellow car standing beside me is the Audi S5 Sportback, and allow me a moment to try and put that into perspective. What exactly is an Audi S5 Sportback? Well, the clue is all in the name. Because it's an S5, it sits between the S4 and the S6 in Audi's model range. And if you know Audi's S-cars, you know that means it is a sort of halfway point between the more mundane A cars, everyday use, and the really hardcore performance cars that have the RS badge on them. And the last clue is Sportback. As you can probably tell, it's not a conventional sedan in the way it's shaped. Yes, it has 4 doors, but it's also got this lovely curving roof, and it adds just a little bit more sex appeal to the package. So what this car claims to be is a performance sedan that also has a whole lot of everyday practicality built into it and a bit of style as well. So I want to see how well it does all of those things. Okay, admittedly, at first glance you could mistake the S5 Sportback for an A4. It's about the same size after all. They even have similar details like the headlamps, tail lamps and grille. But take a second look and you'll notice that it's wider and lower, that it has an ever so subtle curve down the side, and of course that it has an elegant sloping fastback roof. In fact, if you open the large tailgate, you'll find a boot big enough for 4 people's weekend luggage. Also part of the Sportback package are doors with frameless windows that open up to reveal a rather spacious cabin. Now you might think that because of this car's low coupe-like roofline, that headroom back here is quite compromised. And yes, it's not as good as a full-on sedan. But that said, it stretches so far behind that you do actually have enough headroom here, and it's also scooped out for that little bit more. Legroom, as you can see, is more than enough, and the seats themselves are very, very comfortable. But we would say that it's probably best just for 2. So, the S5 Sportback does practicality really well. But remember, it's also meant to pack in some performance. So let's step into the seat that matters most. So the first thing you need to know about the S5 Sportback right off the bat is that it's based on the S4, which in turn is based on the current A4. And that has its implications. You see, the current A4 is one of the oldest models in Audi's range right now. And you can see the signs of that inside this car as well, starting with the dashboard. Yes, it's very well built, but the design is a bit old compared to what you get in modern Audis. You do get a few requisite sporty touches, like this nice flat-bottom steering wheel and these optional sports bucket seats. The other area where you can see the signs is in the technology, like this MMI system. It's got a small screen, and although it has all the functionality you need, including satellite navigation, the interface just seems a little bit old school in comparison to new Audis. But it's also inherited some good stuff from the Audi S4. And that includes the powertrain. It's a 3-litre supercharged V6 producing 328 brake horsepower. And because it's supercharged, the power delivery is absolutely instant. There's no delay, and all the torque seems to come up almost from the word go. It does all this while making a nice little purr. Not a growl like the RS5, but that only reflects its more civilized nature. It's properly quick too, with 45 kgm of torque rocketing the car forward relentlessly. Audi's 5.1 second 0 to 100 kph claim is completely believable. The other bit of the powertrain that it's inherited from the S4, of course, is the 7-speed dual-clutch gearbox. And as ever with Audi's dual-clutch gearbox, this one works quickly and intuitively. When you're in comfort or efficiency modes, it's quick to get you to the higher gears to save fuel. But if you pop it into dynamic mode, well, it's always at the right rev. Of course, if you want to take matters into your own hands, there are shift paddles available behind the steering wheel. Drive it gently in efficiency mode and you might actually get decent fuel economy out of it. So, when it comes to the looks, the space and the powertrain, the S5 Sportback lives up to its dual-purpose brief. And that brings us on to the underpinnings. Unfortunately, this being a slightly older chassis, the steering is also part of the package, and it is a classic old school Audi steering, and that means it's a bit numb, and that does detract ever so slightly from the driving experience when you're really going flat out. On the flip side, it does have the advantage of being really light and easy to use around town. And you'll appreciate that if you plan to use the S5 as a daily driver. What you'll also like is the ride quality. Although the S5 is a performance car, it's also intended for use every day, and to that end, the suspension has been very well calibrated. There's no adaptive suspension, and that's a bit of a shame. We would have liked that in a car like this. But still, the regular fixed suspension is a good blend of comfort and firmness. It hasn't been raised for India like any of the Audi A cars, and that's really good when you want to drive fast. I'd go as far as saying it rides better overall than even the standard A4. It doesn't float and bounce around when you go faster, but it's still quite supple, and the stiffness means it will hold its own in the corners. And speaking of corners, there is of course Quattro all-wheel drive to keep you clung to the road, and there's even a sport mode for the traction control that will let you have a bit of fun while keeping you safe. Well, all things considered, I think the Audi S5 Sportback has done everything it set out to do. It's a fantastic blend of performance and practicality, and if you're the type of person who thought the S4 was just a little too plain and a little too run-of-the-mill, the swooping Sportback shape of this car takes care of that as well. All this is bundled together at just a shade under Rs 63 lakh, and at that price, well, it doesn't really have too much competition.
Well, I'm starting today's story here at the museum because the car in today's story probably deserves a place in there. It's the longest running, most manufactured car of a single platform that's ever been made, and its 78-year-old history carries many iconic moments. It's an icon in itself. Ironically, this iconic old car brings out the youth in you, makes you want to be a kid, makes you want to do things differently, have fun, which is why we're out on a shoot at night for a change. Well, today's car isn't really old because it's the 2016 version of the iconic Beetle. Now, if I got into a modern-day car and saw an interior like this, I'd say, oh God, old school and passé. But here in the Beetle, it really adds to the character and appeal of this car. You know, this flat upright dash, the 4 glove box on top, the real one lies underneath, the hooded binnacle that houses the dials, these oddly shaped handles. But that's really where the retro ends, because everything else is pretty modern, be it the steering wheel, the seats, this bright splash of color across the dash, that's very Gen X, and of course this modern touchscreen infotainment system. What really makes this car all the more fun to drive now is the 1.4-litre turbo petrol TSI engine, and I'm headed to a free stretch of road to enjoy it. The engine is the 148 bhp version seen in the Octavia, and the Beetle being a smaller and lighter car means this engine feels really lively. It's really a nice engine, and it may not have super quick numbers on paper, but it feels nice and sprightly and peppy out on the road. Makes it fun to drive. You know, the car, the night shoot, this feeling of freedom has just got me into the mood for this leisurely drive out on this open stretch of road. I've got the windows down, the sunroof open, the temperature's great. And what's really nice is that this gearbox, you know, lets me sit in 7th at reasonably low RPMs. And yet, if I want to get a quick move on, all I have to do is put my foot down, quick shift, and I'm ready to go. It's smooth and barely lets you know it's shifting even at lower speeds. Also, running around at lower RPMs means fuel efficiency will improve. At higher speeds, at straight line, the Beetle really feels planted and solid and composed. Yes, it does have a fair bit of roll around corners. It's no Mini Cooper in the way that it drives, but it still goes round the corners pretty well, and the steering just adds to the feel of confidence. Well, freeway done, we were headed off to see if we could settle into a spot to get our static filming done. And on the way there, now going over the rougher parts of Bombay and the potholed, pock-marked roads, I've got a chance to realize how pretty darn good the ride of the Beetle really is. It pretty much absorbs all these bumps and potholes, and it's only the sharper ones that catch it out. It's been an entertaining night with a nice long drive, good music, time to just be free. You know, when the fun stories happen, I'm always the one relegated to the back because everybody else stands in line. But the reason I got to do this one so easily was because everybody said this is a chick car. Well, it's done a lot to change its looks. The roof has gone flatter, the tailgate is more upright, the tail lamps aren't the cute little blobs, and at the front a longer bonnet, wide chiseled air dam and sharper bumper show its business side. Yes, the signature round headlamps remain, but even they are ringed with crescent-shaped LED running lamps for a little more menace. The new shape has allowed the Beetle to be quite practical. Apart from a very large boot, you get loads of room in the front and a sufficient amount in the two rear bucket seats as well. Only headroom is a bit tight. Well, to sum it up, you know, I could go on technicalities. There's a lot else that's around at 30 lakhs, and it may seem like the Beetle has stiff competition. I could talk about how it's grown as a car. It's more spacious, it's more comfortable, and it's definitely more fun to drive. But it's not really about that. It's about this. What I'm doing now is 3 a.m. in the morning. I've never felt this wide awake. I'm eating anda pav at Churchgate Station, something I haven't done in ages. And it's all thanks to this car. It's made me go out and just do the things I wanted to do that I haven't done in a very long time. It's the character, it's the soul of this car, and its iconic status that's its biggest draw.